digital news media at Signal Media. Welcome to our Disruptive by Design podcast. Signal is the official news outlet of AFCEA International, and our Disruptive by Design podcast features those under 40, our community of emerging leaders. In this episode of Disruptive by Design, we're featuring emerging leaders who spoke at AFCEA's TechNet Augusta conference in August. If you didn't know, at each one of AFCEA's flagship events like West, TechNet Cyber in Baltimore, TechNet Augusta in Augusta, Georgia, TechNet Indo-Pacific in Hawaii, we feature a panel of emerging leaders who are experts in their field. For the TechNet Augusta conference, which is an Army-centric conference held in conjunction with the Army Cyber Center of Excellence, we had 6 emerging leaders that delved into the beneficial uses for artificial intelligence related to a data-centric model for military use. They also looked at the necessary cyber defense measures needed to protect against AI-based cyber attacks. The panel included moderator Melanie McCarthy, who is a portfolio manager at Maximus, and Melanie also graciously recorded an episode with us previously, so definitely check that out. She talked a lot about her work-life balance and gave some great advice. The panel also included Dondre Lawson, who is the CEO of Emerald Technical Solutions, Alex Longarzo, the Client Solutions Director at eSimplicity, Justine McDonald, who is a senior cybersecurity specialist with AT&T Global Business, Mike Williams, cyber engineer at Metronome, and Anthony Zeck, Director of Data and AI at ECS. These leaders examine the ins and outs of data and AI for the battlefield, and they have some great insights. And with that, welcome to Disruptive by Design with the emerging leaders at TechNet Augusta.
For those who don't know me, my name is Tina Jordan. I'm the Vice President of Membership at AFCEA International, and I am really excited to be with you today to introduce a panel titled Beneficial Uses for Artificial Intelligence and How to Use It Responsibly and Securely. For those who may not know, AFCEA's emerging leaders are made up of young professionals under the age of 40, but I want to stress that our panelists are here today not solely because of their age. They're here because they are experts in their field and they have experiences and expertise to share with you, and they just happen to be under the age of 40. So we appreciate your time and support for our panelists today. You are in for a great session, as our emerging leaders always have great perspectives on IT, AI, and cyber. This session qualifies for continuing education units. The session has to last 1 hour, so the panelists want to finish with 10 minutes till the end to have 10 minutes of questions. If you want CEUs and there's not a lot of questions, think of some questions, because we actually have to have it go for 1 hour in order to be able to scan anybody for the CEUs. We have a scanner in the back. The scanner does not open until 5:25. And so you have to stay for the session, and then it'll stay open for 10 minutes after the end of the session. So make sure you'll see Kathy Mineta in the room at the back, and you can see her to be scanned at the end. So to start, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Melanie McCarthy. Melanie is a United States Air Force Reserve Command veteran, a seasoned contract management professional in the Defense Department, and a senior director at Maximus, where she manages the defense team's Army portfolio within the technology consulting services. Melanie will introduce our panelists and moderate today's discussion. So please join me in a warm AFCEA welcome for Melanie McCarthy and her panel.
Thank you so much. That really was a very kind introduction. So today's topic, as Tina mentioned, is good uses for artificial intelligence and how to use it responsibly and securely. Today's data-centric battlefield is growing increasingly complex due to rapid advancements in artificial intelligence machine learning applications. As a revolutionary approach in need of close collaboration between industry and government, this panel will explore architectures and tools that will provide the Army with competitive advantages against our nation's adversaries. Best practices regarding how to securely handle big data in theater, in networks, and on the cloud will be discussed here today. Our panelists will also share their insights into tips for how the audience can manage the risk of AI-based cyber threats affecting them. Our first panelist today is Dondre Lawson. Dondre Lawson, CEO of Emerald Technology Solutions, is a seasoned technology professional with a passion for driving innovation and delivering exceptional results. With over 15 years of experience in industry, D'Andre has established himself as a highly skilled and versatile IT leader. D'Andre's experience lies in cloud computing, virtualization, and cybersecurity. His in-depth knowledge of platforms such as Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services enables him to design and deploy robust and resilient cloud environments. Our next panelist is Alec Lingarzo. Alec holds a pivotal role as a Client Solutions Director at eSimplicity, managing the defense and national security portfolios. He has a distinguished history of providing support to the DoD with key contributions to projects like Joint Common Foundation Prototype, a purpose-built, secure, cloud-based AI development and experimentation platform designed to enhance the DoD's mission capabilities. Beyond his professional commitments, Alec also serves on the board of AFCEA Nova. Our next panelist is Justine McDonald. Justine McDonald is a senior cybersecurity specialist for AT&T Global Business in the National Security Organization. Ms. McDonald is responsible for securely integrating AT&T commercially provided solutions into DoD environments. She also interfaces with DoD leaders and cybersecurity experts to understand cyber requirements, changes, and associated challenges. Prior to joining AT&T in 2020, Ms. McDonald worked for the Department of the Army for 20 years. Next panelist is Mike Williams. As a lead cyber engineer at Metronome, LLC, Mike steers a data acquisition group, a role that intersects with the heart of AI/ML applications. His efforts in securely implementing large-scale SIEM solutions around the globe has set new standards in safeguarding sensitive information. Mike's pioneering efforts extend to his role as the Security Operations Center lead at the Marine Corps Cyberspace Warfare Group. Our final panelist today is Tony Zek. Tony Zek is the Director of Data and AI at ECS. Tony oversees data and AI at ECS to support its many customers. Previously there, he oversaw cyber analytics and architectures to secure customer environments in defense, government, and the private sector, as well as leading ECS's data and AI community of excellence. Tony served as an active-duty U.S. Marine officer in intelligence and cybersecurity, deploying in support of Operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom and other operations in the Middle East. He continues to serve as a Marine Corps reservist, where he has served on the Joint Staff as the Reserve Deputy Director for Collection Management and continues to serve as a Data and AI Line of Operation Lead for the Marine Innovation Unit. With that, I would like to start off our conversation today with some definitions. So for the panelists here, and you can jump in and answer them, I'm not going to call any single person out. What is artificial intelligence? And what are some common misconceptions surrounding what AI is?
Hi, I guess I'll be the first one to talk. So simply put, artificial intelligence is computers or a robot that's obviously programmed to simulate human intelligence. And some misconceptions about AI come from, quite frankly, the entertainment industry, in my opinion, like Predator and things of that nature. So people think that, AI is going to take over the world and destroy us, but really, it really depends on us to determine what AI is going to do.
I can piggyback off of that. AI will not replace humanity. AI is infallible. It does make mistakes. It does predict mistakes. And AI won't replace your jobs unless you don't get behind it and figure out how to use it.
I think also for the security professionals and system engineers in the room that have any considerations or concerns about it, just remember that you're working with nothing more than a data platform, so large data, and then a model. So at the end of the day, it's nothing but data that's available to you, whether you've aggregated that yourself or bought it from somewhere else, along with a model that you run it against. So.
And I'll add that AI, I think, is really kind of just the next paradigm in terms of application development, computer programming. It's another tool in the toolbox. It has some more advanced logic, but is an evolution of what has already been going on in terms of software development. And you need to think about it similarly. It's not some magical or mystical force that is going to solve all of your woes, and you really need to carefully consider what you're using it for when you're thinking about employing AI.
And kind of to wrap everything up, one of the thoughts that I have is we think of AI as the product. The thing that I want is AI. And you hear it a lot. I think many of you attend the speaking circuit the last couple of years. It was cloud, zero trust, now it's AI. AI is the feature of something. It is not the product. So think about the capability it provides you. It's not going to solve every single problem. And we have to really kind of rethink what we're asking out of AI to provide us.
Yeah, I heard somebody earlier in another session say that AI is something that could be, like bought out of the box. It's not. You can't purchase AI and say, hey, actually, me and John were talking about it yesterday, right? Customers like, hey, we need AI now. Send us 2 boxes with AI. It doesn't work like that. And I think that's another misconception for people that actually can't understand AI.
And one last misconception. All right, AI is getting a lot of press recently, right? Like this gentleman, Alec, has mentioned. But AI has been around since the mid-1950s. So this is not new. It's only gotten more powerful because of our recent advancement in compute and power, and our networks have gotten a lot faster. That's why it's advanced a lot more quickly than back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So it's not new. It's actually pretty old.
Right. Thank you for that. Next question. What does trusting AI mean? And are there use cases where AI can be trusted more than others?
I'm going to open this up to the room. Can anyone define the word trust? Is there a single definition that we all agree on? No. So for AI, describing what trust is very unique. For the Army, it may mean one thing. For the Navy, it may mean something else. But as you kind of dive down into the problem statements or the products they're trying to build, or the outcomes they're trying to have, trust really changes depending on the person. I think there needs to be a foundational understanding of what we accept with AI. And I know Dondre will probably argue me, what's the level of AI we can apply to different components? If it's everyday activities or if it's kinetic, trust means very different things. I'm not going to get into it, but you can take it.
Can I go first? So I think that he's established that we need to identify what trust means, right? So if we're willing to trust a firewall to block X amount of malicious packets that we deem within a certain error criteria, I would say yes, that we can trust AI, right? So at the end of the day, it's about accepting risk and accepting action on the network on behalf of a technology. So as a commander or someone else, a business owner, whoever it may be, if you accept that AI will do X action within a deviation of 1%, right, so 90-something% probably, then yes, we can trust it absolutely. So just keep that in mind whenever we're going forward in discussions, that there is going to be an error rate in association to it, and that at the end of the day, it's just another tool providing a capability that you need to accept the risk for.
So they hit on 2 things, really. It's the applicability and then the predictability of AI, right? If we're talking about we use AI tools, or we've built AI tools for business mission items, that's perfectly fine, right? Because if AI makes a mistake and a human has to come and correct the mistake, that's different. If we're talking about kinetic items, especially for people that are in the military, I personally am not going to trust AI to make kinetic decisions in the battlefield. I wouldn't put it on saying, hey, the computer's going to make a better decision than that squad leader, that team leader, right? Or that young commander that's out there leading his troops. I just think that a lot of people now are trying to force, especially the DoD, right? They're trying to force AI down everyone's throats. And it has to be done in a meticulous manner where if we are using AI and it is applicable in a war setting, it has to be just done carefully, right? And again, it goes back to the applicability of where actually AI should be living.
And also with regards to trust, I mean, really relies on the developer, like you guys. How well are you developing that system? What kind of data are you feeding it? Are you feeding it enough data? The right variety of data? Are you feeding it the right type of training data? Are you training it enough to act predictably? Are you maintaining it? Just because it works doesn't mean it's going to continue to work in the same fashion. You have to keep feeding it. And when you feed it new data, is it still acting the way you intended it to act? And part of maintaining it is securing it as well. So a lot of the trust goes into how well are you developing and maintaining those systems, those AI systems, and your data, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think trust with any kind of tool, AI in particular, is very situational, and it's based on a lot of what the other panelists have been mentioning. The factors, what kind of scenario is it being used in? What kind of data is it being fed? What kind of data is it deciding off of? What's its history? These are all important factors. Stakes of the decision that the AI is being asked to make, I think, are also very critical. I would trust AI to choose a movie for me tonight, any day. Well, maybe not any day, but a lot of the time, I can trust it to do that, and most people do. I mean, people use Netflix all the time, and you could consider the algorithm behind that movie selection AI. But deciding whether an object in a crosswalk is a pedestrian or not, maybe we need to look a little bit more closely in that and scrutinize that more. But that's true of any application, any program, any machine. So you really need to keep in mind the context that you want to leverage AI in when you're thinking about, should I trust this or not? And then the history of that algorithm's ability to make decisions.
And a good example of that is who in the room owns a Tesla, right? There's been, this is early, right? This is early development for Tesla with ML and AI. It made the wrong decisions, right? People died, car accidents. Even if people are driving drunk, it still got them home before they implemented changes, right, to better their tool. So that's like the clearest example that I could come up with. No, nothing against Elon, just it's something that has happened, and you hear about it on the news, right? But again, as technology is ever changing, you're going to have to keep working on it.
All right. The next question: what risks does AI/ML pose from an ethical perspective for government and commercial applications?
So I have a hot take on this. It has no risk as long as you do appropriate scoping. So kind of to go back to what we just talked about, as long as you're scoping your use case appropriately and thinking of the tertiary impacts that it could have if AI does X, Y, or Z, I really think the risk is very minimal. I like to call it the Freakonomics effect for anyone that's read that book, right? So if X happens, well, what will directly happen? What could happen tertiary to that, or even all the way down the line, right? So I think that the problem of AI is just scoping appropriate use cases, what is the most egregious impact that it could have, and then risk acceptance for that. So.
Another example, T-Mobile engineers decided it was a good idea to dump all of their source code inside of ChatGPT, right? It's like, you know how to make, and that also goes back to the AFCEA, right, the human-computer interaction. As a human, you should know that that's probably wrong. At least run it past some people first. And everyone in the room is like, hey, this is a really good idea. Let's ask ChatGPT. That's owned by someone else, right? Even though that the data is yours, it's not yours anymore, or the proprietary data isn't yours anymore. So the risk associated with it really can be based and should be based off of human interaction with the tool, just like anything else.
So from an ethical perspective, I think there are always going to be risks with AI. And I'm just speaking generally, not specific to DoD or anything like that, but like the information that we feed AI, we have to feed it a lot in order for it to learn appropriately. And a lot of the historic data that we have is bias. We are a biased society. AI will make ties to that, and we will have to correct it as we identify those ties. Does anybody remember when Google started their facial recognition program? What it did to a young gentleman's photo album? made an album of gorillas. There was no gorilla in that album. It was him, a young black man. He was identified, AI identified him as a gorilla. And a part of that had to do with Google not really having the right kind of data set to identify dark-skinned young black men in their AI capability. But I just think that it will eventually pick up on those biases. Also, when we're talking about machine learning, especially when it's self-learning, it's not going to explain why it made the decision. Like, why did it do that? Well, we know. Google knows why it did it. They can't fix it. Try to type in gorilla in your photos. If you've ever been to a zoo, like gorillas, monkey, ape, chimpanzee, you will not be able to pull it up in Google Photos. It won't happen. Google has not fixed it. It's 8 years later. Still hasn't fixed it. And I believe Microsoft and Apple actually follow suit with that as well. You cannot search those terms in their photo. So I do think that AI will always tie back to our society's biases. We just need to catch it and reprogram the language so that it does not create an ethical issue for us.
So I think those are some really important points made. First, AI being a tool, you can use a tool ethically or unethically. It does have that, I'll say, kind of gotcha. I think the area where AI is a little different than, I'll say, traditional, computer ethics, I'll call it, is the role that data plays in algorithms, and just how important it is. I mean, the data that you feed, that you train an algorithm with, really becomes the algorithm itself, the decision-making that occurs there. So if you're feeding it with biased data, if you're feeding it with incomplete data, if you're feeding it with data you don't think is biased, but may have unintentional omissions in it, you're going to have a result that maybe you didn't anticipate, and that is where people can run into significant issues with applying AI and results that might give you an answer that you didn't anticipate. So that I think is the biggest distinguishing point in terms of ethical or responsible AI compared to perhaps how assessments were done before.
So not to get caught up only on the data, but we have to remember that the objective of the model matters, right? So what do I want my model to do? Let's say that I wanted it to increase recruiting and retention rates for the Marine Corps, right? It would probably, with no guidance, it would go out and it would claim outlandish things to young civilians and to those that are enlisted and serving now, and it would hurt PR in the long run, right? So again, making sure that you're scoping for the tertiary effects and things that could impact that we're not thinking of is vitally important, and doing tabletop exercises for what this could result in is going to help deliver a higher quality assurance product from AI in and of itself.
So 2 weeks ago, the DoD stood up Task Force Lima, right? It's an AI task force for the DoD to help with things like data scraping, data validity, making sure the data is valid, and then how the data is actually being used, who's the owner, who controls it. And then I think 4 weeks ago, the Army actually put out its own version of its own AI, right? And obviously that's blocked off, that's sealed off. But the data, wherever it's coming from, still has to be valid and true or not true in any situation. And if we take the data and then ask the data to make decisions based off of the applicable situation, then that is where issues start to come up, right, or should be brought up.
All right. Our next question, how does the Army and its vendors envision infrastructure and architecture changing to better support the needs of AI?
So one of the things that the Army is embarking on, a couple different things. First, Project Lynchpin is evolving what the Army is doing in terms of AI development. Project Lynchpin is modeled on some of the existing work within DoD, where CDAO has built infrastructures to train algorithms, and the Army is taking those best practices and bringing them into their own environment. The second thing that the Army is doing, which is very important, is they're adopting a data management framework called a data mesh. And data mesh, as we talked about, data is a fuel of algorithms. If you don't have good data, you're not going to have a good algorithm because that data gets directly encoded within the algorithm itself. So having the data to feed that is important. So managing how you get that data is critical for a number of reasons. And data mesh is, I'll say, the latest iteration of data management strategies. It actually came about originally in the commercial world, but calls for a federated system of data management, which also has the effect of making people responsible for their own data. So they're responsible for generating their data and really makes them responsible for how that data is coming around. And this is a really important topic. As we talked about earlier, there's biases potentially within data, and then there's another whole field called adversarial AI, where adversaries can get in and subtly poison data that you're feeding into an algorithm to cause misclassifications. If you look up online, there's some great adversarial AI examples where folks have stickers, for example, that they wear, and it causes, for example, a facial recognition algorithm to misidentify it as a banana or not identify it as nothing at all. And it's just this little blob, and what the blob is doing is actually manipulating the AI. And people are able to do that based on their knowledge of the algorithm itself and then poisoning the data that comes into it. So data management, really important. And the Army's tackling that big time right now, which I'm very happy to see.
Right, so Young Bang, a couple hours ago, just spoke about like data poisoning, data mesh, and how the Army is attempting to work with, and the DoD is attempting to work with industry to make sure that those things are valid, right, and make sure that everything that the data that people control, right, different units control is theirs, but it is also still reachable at any time. And then something else that he kind of spoke about, but if anyone knows Major General Jeff Ray, he starts all of his speeches, the network needs to be correct before we try to implement new things. We're not going to continue to attempt to build until we fix problem number one, right? Because everything's going to sit, especially for those layer one items, it's going to sit on the network, right? And the network has to be perfect, or at least perfect, in order for us to be able to talk to, if we're in the Marines, talking to the Air Force, vice versa, Army talking to the Navy. These things have to be set into place. I think that actually plays into another question that's upcoming, but they have to be set into place initially before we can begin to start to really utilize AI like it can be used.
So just remember, AI is just data and code. So how would you secure code and make sure it's available? Any other way you would implement solutions that relate to the CIA triad, right? So just remember, it always goes back to a very simple construct that we're taught within Sec Plus and low-level, well, not low, but lower-level certification. So just remember, it always ties back to CIA triad.
And as far as like specific initiatives for creating a network that's more AI friendly, the Joint Warfighting Capability, JWCC, everyone familiar or heard of it? It's like a $1 billion effort in the government, 4 different vendors supporting the cloud for the DoD. And with that, as we transition more to a cloud type environment, we need to get after zero trust. And of course, Thunderdome. A production contract was just awarded, I believe, to Booz Allen, billions of dollars as well. A couple weeks ago, I want to say, to put Thunderdome into production. So that, as we migrate to the cloud, we need to make sure that we also get to zero trust quickly.
I think it's a really interesting question, and in an environment where you can access the cloud, it's pretty transparent how you approach it. But once you're in the field and you're getting information relayed back in real or near time, how do we compute at the edge? How do we have efficient models that can compute at the edge? That takes time. It's not quick. How do we get to a speed where we're actually relaying back information and valuable pieces of content back to whoever's in the field to provide kind of an instantaneous adaptation to their plan or approach, or in some cases it could be life or death if they can get that within kind of mere minutes versus if it has to shoot back to the environments, could take hours, days, depending on what it is.
And it also goes back to the applicability of AI, right? In the situation of, hey, am I going to trust AI to make kinetic decisions if we don't fully understand how data mesh is actually supposed to be work, or we're working on it in process and there's issues with the network. There's been issues with the network for forever, right? And then utilizing AI for, our units and troops that are in the field to actually push like software updates, like things to help the warfighter, right? How are you supposed to do it? Because now, in a lot of situations, the people in the field have to get disk, and they update their software on disk, right? It's crazy. We should be past it, but we're not, and that's why they're trying to get to this. Hey, this DevSecOps CI/CD pipeline where we can push updates, or we can use AI to, do the updates for people, right, in real time, and that's all things that are coming, right? They're on the way.
And I'd like to add one thing. ML ops is incredibly important for AI. AI is never finished, so to speak, just like software is never really finished. It always requires updates, patches that they have to apply. AI models degrade over time. They also don't necessarily respond well to like a changing environment. Computer vision algorithm that works great in the desert might not work so well in a jungle. So you've got to be able to continuously update it, which is a change in the way the government has traditionally thought about acquisition. The government's much happier to buy a box that does a thing and not have to work and doesn't really think about how it's going to maintain it or how it's going to update it after that, whereas the government needs to evolve to a mindset where continually updating, continually tweaking models, continually replacing them and evolving. Otherwise, that capability is going to experience some significant issues.
I think you hit on a really interesting topic. So if we think of traditional DoD and procurement timelines, who would say they've seen one in 1 month? 6 months, a year, 2 years from requirements? So that's really the real challenge with AI is we're not keeping pace with the changes of it. Our adversaries, I can imagine, are moving pretty quickly. They don't have the bureaucracy that we have, the system that we have. So how do we keep pace, but also keeping in mind the ethicalness, the safety? So it's a really complex challenge, but we have to start with the simple things, which is procurement. How do we pay for it? How do we even define AI? It's the simple things that need to get solved yesterday, and that enables us to build new capability that's leveraging AI and advancing kind of our missions.
So for what Alec spoke on, not this time, but the previous time about, how do we do AI at the edge, right? Well, how do we do anything at the edge, right? A determination of critical data or critical assets needs to be done, and then provide the appropriate resource to it. So this is actually something I do like in my day-to-day job, but determination of what data will matter to AI to feed the algorithm for improvement, and then determine if that has enough processing and store and compute at the edge, or if it needs to be sent up, right? And if it needs to be sent up, are we going to implement QoS? Are we going to implement some sort of control medium so that we ensure that the critical capabilities for that unit are able to still facilitate in a degraded state? So these are just, again, it goes back to requirement and scoping of the problem, right? Not to beat a dead horse, but that's really where it goes back to is proper stating of requirements. So.
All right. This next question might bring on a lively debate. Is a comprehensive AI policy needed in the DoD space?
Yes. It's more than that. I think so, yes. Not think, I know so. It's too transformational to not have a policy specific to AI that explains how to use it responsibly and ethically and how we go about purchasing it. We can't bake it in to our existing policies like an afterthought. We definitely need something that sets the foundation for AI.
I don't feel the same way. I do think there are some policy changes that need to be made. It needs to be considered, but there's a lot of policy out there right now about how software gets delivered, ethics, how, security, and there are some tweaks that need to be made to that. But most of the functionality of AI, could be covered under existing policy. And I am concerned that if we create a whole new regime to regulate AI, A, it's not going to keep up with it, and B, it's going to stifle innovation and development on AI. There are certainly some very real concerns around AI that we need to think about. I think the risks from autonomy are kind of overstated. One of the things I like to point out, too, is that we've had lethal autonomy for a long time in the form of a cruise missile. Cruise missile is totally autonomous once you launch it, and also very lethal to whoever's on the far end of it. So we're further along in terms of that capability than I think some people realize. It is a debate that we need to have, for sure, though, for sure.
All right, so I think this is a double-edged sword, right? Half of the Army, let's say 75% of the Army, people that are retiring, your older individuals, if something was new that came out, there was a policy that went with it. And that's just how the Army and maybe the Marines, right, have been doing things. With AI, obviously it's ever-changing. The data set's changing. The data it's getting is changing. We don't know if it's poisonous, if it's valid, if it's true. So we can't keep up with the policies that are set now. How are we supposed to keep up with the continuous growth of AI? That's still not to say that we shouldn't at least, and that's why they stood up Task Force Lima and dumped X amount of dollars into that, to say, how do we control this, right? This is something that is really uncontrollable, but there's also been a lot of, autonomous lethal weapon systems that have been out for a while. Some companies recently have been using generative AI for targeting geospatial items. Person is there, person is not there, person is there with a bunch of people with rocket launchers. How do we articulate a plan to set a policy or not set a policy around AI? The conversation, and obviously that bigger than us, has to happen between Army, between really DOD and senior leadership about how are you guys going to effectively utilize this in a kinetic environment, right? Non-kinetic environments, when you're not talking about casualties and people losing their actual lives, that is a difference for me of like, hey, AI is applicable in those situations, but once we start talking about if it's not an autonomous weapon and it's people that are just in the field, right? Microsoft released IVAS 1.2, was it 2 weeks ago, I think, that they actually brought it out, right? And it's a heads-up optic display with a bunch of cool stuff in it, right? Your ammo, your water, the people that's with you, closest friendlies to you, right? And if we develop the AI solution that states or says, hey, I need to go from point A to point B, and it tells you you will encounter no enemies on your way there, but you'll encounter 5 different groups of enemies there, and different things you weren't aware of, right? That's still on the human person to actually be able to make solid decisions as that leader, that commander, that senior NCO there, to be able to say, hey, this is what we're going to actually do and not listen to AI. So there's no yes or wrong question or answer to the question. I just think that it has to be spoken more about, and that should happen. The policy around it, at least, something that's base, has to go into effect before we really start utilizing it, and then lose or not lose lives.
I'd also like to add, one of the challenges right now around AI is actually just figuring out where it is. One of CDAO's missions is to ensure that so much money or so many programs leverage AI. The problem is a lot of the programs that DoD has right now, a lot of people don't realize it, but they have AI algorithms underneath them. That is a primary component. People often don't even realize that AI is providing particular capability. So even just identifying programs with AI implications or responsibilities is very difficult because usually the program is named, something like IVAS, for example, right? IVAS is a heads-up display for soldiers. Well, there are a lot of algorithms underneath that, but from a quick reading of a description of that program, you'd never know that there's any kind of algorithm underpinning it. Yeah, Outlook, antivirus.
How many programs use Outlook? All of them.
So as far as the debate on whether we need policy, I don't think it's not being debated anymore. We're getting one. CDAO was created to create that policy. We are getting a policy. It's just a matter of when.
It's something I struggle with. What is the balance of policy, or some of us call it bureaucracy, in being active in building quality products? We've never heard bureaucracy accelerating innovation. It's usually a hindrance. What was it, 5-7 years ago, we had the same debate around modern software development. What's the policy behind using agile and continuous integration development, having continuous ATOs? We argued ad nauseum, and we've realized there's a lot of value in it. Yes, we have to control it and identify what it is, but there's a big shift from waterfall deliveries to agile deliveries at a basic level. Our weapon systems were being developed over 6-month releases, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. Now the Air Force is crediting F-35s being released over the air. Like, that wouldn't be able to happen with a ton of bureaucracy and policy in place. Yes, you need your foundational level as guide rails, but you don't need deterrence to stop people from innovating. Google, yes, they have policy in place, but they allow their employees to go and build and scale it from small to large. The impact's not going to be as detrimental or even noticeable, but there's a lot of avenues we can explore having policy in place, but also building capability that enhances the DoD, the Army, and so forth.
Yeah, and the policy that I was talking about that CDAO is developing is at the DoD level. Each of the components are going to be responsible for creating their own thing. But of course, they can't, be less stringent than the DoD policy, but they're going to be responsible for creating their own policy after DoD sets those guide rails. So really, it's going to be up to the components to make sure that they don't shoot themselves in the foot either. But as well as DoD, make sure they don't create some kind of bureaucratic process that hinders innovation. But for the most part, it's going to be up to the components to do that.
I think the biggest risk, and I think we can jump to the next question, is how long is that going to take?
Right.
That's really the struggle. Is we have adversaries who are already doing this, and we have that capability, and a lot of it's in intelligence and the other components. And you don't hear it brought up because it is a feature, not the product. But can we get there tomorrow or today instead of 2 years from now?
All right. Our next question, how will AI affect cross-domain solutions moving forward?
So I'm going to start with this. I'm going to answer a question with an example. And we were talking about this before. So if you play video games or your kids play video games, Call of Duty developed a solution utilizing AI to pair people onto servers depending on proximity, right? How close they are in their network connection, right? There's no human interaction there. It just happens in the background, right? And when we talk about a lot of the things that we see, like in video games, how can someone play with someone else that's in Africa on a totally different system and it'd be fine, right? But we can't figure out how we're supposed to work with the Air Force or Joint Forces and how we're supposed to make different systems talk. It's is baffling and upsetting, but we're obviously working towards getting there, right? And I think AI is definitely a good tool to be utilized when we start talking about cross-domain solutions, cross-domain functionality, and then if it actually is going to work, right? How am I getting data/information from point A to point B, whether it's going from the Army to the Air Force, from the Air Force to the Germans. How is that happening and working, right? And a lot of the processes are still manual. And I think that it's crazy, but I think that the Army always talks about talent management and who we actually need to grab. I believe if you went and knocked on, some of the guys' doors and say, hey, can we borrow some of your network engineers for a couple of months? We'll pay you X amount of dollars. You'll see a vast difference in change because they've been doing this stuff for the past 10 years, right, to allow these things to happen. Obviously, the application is different. We're talking about video games versus war, but it's the similarities are there, right, very likely, and AI can help with that, right? It just depends on how it's actually applied to the situation and the circumstances that your organization may be under.
Yeah, so exactly what he said towards the end there, identification of what it can provide. So if you're speaking specifically about cross-domain or threat hunting or making better firewalls or detecting threat actors, whatever it may be, right? You need to first identify, if it's specifically for cross-domain, I would probably look at your whole chain, right? Your whole data flow chain. This is what it is. Identify your processes and procedures. Where are the long hiccups or stop gaps? Where are they not? Which ones are done by humans? Which ones would enable the most free time for humans to do more important things? And then based on that identification, implement AI accordingly. So not to not answer the question at all, but that's how you should probably go about solving AI problems and where to implement.
So when I heard the question, I was thinking that this is like you can go at this in so many different directions. Like, are we talking about cross-domain between components, cross-domain from a network perspective, from a data perspective, cross-domain from domestic to our foreign partners? Like, there's a lot of avenues you can go down. I'm just going to speak on the data. So from a data perspective, when we talk about training these models, we want to have as much information as possible, obviously. And I think that we run into an issue because sometimes that information that we need is classified. So how do we get classified information into, and more often, I would think that we're running these models on the NIPRNet because SIPR and JWICs just aren't great. So, I mean, you kind of need a pretty good network to do this. How do you declassify that data so you can feed it in? Do you even do it? To feed it into the learning model. How do we go about sharing this information with our foreign partners? That type of thing. So, yeah, I think that needs to be explored a little bit more.
So the rule set for the classification guide exists today, right? It's no surprise to anyone in here, I don't think. So depending on the data, the medium of the data, as well as just how it's formatted, what it consists of, applying the classification guide on preset rules that you train the algorithm based on is how you're going to do the manipulation from one enclave to the other, right? And again, that comes from identifying processes or workflows, what do you care about, what don't you care about, and then just applying a preset DoD policy off of it. And that's how you would get after it. So.
I don't think it's that simple, just personally. I don't think it's that simple.
These next three questions I'm going to give you all at once, and you can answer them as you see fit since they're all around cybersecurity. As the pace of automated cyber attacks accelerates, how can the Army use AI and threat intelligence to combat these threats? How can automation and ML assist in data security efforts across the Army? And how can generative AI support coding best practices to improve cybersecurity and accelerate product delivery cycles?
So I think whenever you're talking about an AI use case, you should always be looking at how are you going to accelerate what you're doing and where you can leverage AI to achieve a competitive advantage. And that is the way we should be thinking about it within cybersecurity. How do we outmaneuver adversaries by leveraging advanced techniques like AI to make better decisions than they are and to essentially cause the adversary to expend a lot of effort for a very little amount of gain. And AI can help us do that at an operational and strategic level, whereas before the complexity of approaching cybersecurity is very high because there's a lot of data and a lot of data to understand. AI can help us actually process through that amount of data in a reasonable time frame and help us make better decisions.
So the acquisition of data is critically vital to all of these roles. So we've spoken about it before, but the data poisoning. So when you implement a heuristic-based security solution on a network, you need to be very careful to make sure that your network's clean, right? Because if you don't, your heuristic-based tool is basically going to say, hey, your network's good, even though that you're compromised, because DCs going out of port 80 is going to look regular to them. So when we're talking about aggregation of data and collection of data to train these models, for whichever question it is, whether it's security, threat intel, or delivery cycles, we need to make sure that the quality of data that we're procuring, whether that's from internal or external sources, is clean, and that our models keep the integrity, going back to what we were talking about before. So.
All right, next question. The implementation of machine learning solutions and AI ops in general is notoriously hard. What have you seen work in the DoD, and what kinds of solutions do you think have the best chance of adoption in the future?
So I can speak anecdotally. One of the things initially when the JAIC was identifying who was their end user to actually use AI, they started with what they thought was the most reasonable group. Analysts who are looking at imagery, day-to-day identifying anomalies or differences. What they realized, and this isn't technical in any way, it's kind of a very simple thing that they overlooked. Those people were afraid they were going to lose their job. So they said, hey, no, we're going to fight AI, we're going to fight AI because it's going to change it. We all know AI just makes your life a little bit easier and you can provide your time towards other efforts. Who they actually found out was their perfect end user of AI in this instance for the JCF and JAIC was SOCOM. They really cared about how can AI help me bring my people home. So one of the biggest things, and I think we've talked about it a lot, is find who actually needs AI and who wants it and the value that it actually brings. I think a lot of the times we make assumptions of what AI is going to provide us from an advantage at the DoD level, and we say, let's build this product. I know there's a couple software companies in the room. We do research first for a reason, to understand what our end users are needing and wanting. I think that needs to be really applied. So your UI, UX, HCD approaches need to apply to AI as well, and understand what product or capability do we really need to build.
So I can speak to this. I'm not going to talk about DoD because I'm be careful about what information I disclose, right? There's a commercial company, Esri, I think they're actually downstairs. They have ArcGIS Pro, they have DroneMap, they have ArcGIS Reportal, and they're using some very small data sets for AI to just detect differences in images, right? And images that they're scanning through satellites, right? Obviously, that could be applied to the battlefield. There's people there, there's not people there. That building was there, that building isn't there. But then taking the AI and then utilizing where and when those buildings were constructed, right? Based off of just either geographical data or data that is ingested and or given to that AI system, and they're processing it through their applications, right? Those COTS applications that some organizations do utilize, right? And I think just something like that, right? It's simple, it helps, it's safe, it's super applicable to situations for people in the field, and things like that is where I think we'll make our money off of because it's going to be better than some of our monolithic applications that do traceability and map reading for end users and or down trace commands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mr. Lawson hit the nail on the head. If we can look at examples that corporate businesses have implemented AI, and if there's any easy wins for the DoD to go after through that process, that's really where we should get in on the ground floor, and develop lessons learned, do action or after action reports, etc., and then just forward progress from there.
All right, so in the spirit of keeping with the schedule, I'm going to skip our last two questions to open it up to the audience for any questions. Just going to ask that you raise your hand so we can bring the microphone to you.
So I have a question about, so when you're just starting to learn about AI, so I found that learning statistics is actually very helpful, it's very implemented in AI, but also when it comes to policies, I started learning geopolitics and just cultural studies because even in cybersecurity, the human factor is still one of the biggest threats that we have. And like the ethical concerns the US has is completely different from China's ethical concerns or Russia's ethical concerns. So I was wondering, are there any other maybe not so obvious things to study that could help a person who's just getting into AI to understand it a little bit better? As even now we have like this new job like prompt engineering and stuff. So just wanted to hear if there's anything else. Thank you.
So I think familiarization with the field that you're getting into is super important because like we were talking about, it's going to help you identify those processes and workflows that you're able to improve with AI. A lot of it is identification of use cases. So not specifically answering your question, I know, but the more familiar that you can get with your field and where you may be able to implement it, I think that development of use cases and then that practice and reps is going to provide a lot of value to you.
I think traditionally for people in the space, right, and obviously we're on the emerging leaders, so we're not that old. When I came into doing IT, right, it was the Army 25 series. I learned about the network first. I had to learn about, how to configure a server, how to cluster things, cybersecurity, right? Like, so traditionally for people that get to architect level or engineer level, what you had to learn in order to get there was a lot of different things in order to be able to say, hey, I'm not a master at anything. I just know about how everything should at least work. I think now if I was a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old coming in, I would be viciously looking after, how to learn more about AI, right? How to study it, how to code in it, how to, understand it, right? Like, I mean, John works for NVIDIA. If you need anything from NVIDIA, see John, right? Shameless plug there, but just graphic processing, just understanding how, like, small things like that and how, it's just very different. Even for me, it's a little weird, right? It's just very weird because we have two interns at our office that are 17, and they understand it probably a little more than most of our employees do, right? But that's because they were born in it, right? They were born in this digital era where it's like, oh, cool, I had a Nokia brick cell phone, right? Oh, cool, we have an iPhone. There's apps on the iPhone. So I think that you definitely have a good point, good question, and going down the right path, man.
One last thing to kind of finalize the question is, companies love telling the products that they're building. Google, AWS, all the brands, they host seminars, events, all free to the public. Great opportunities to learn what the next kind of forward-looking horizon capabilities coming out. Get curious about those. That's really where there's a niche market to kind of get into as the next generation of, that's where I want to be, is not kind of what's current or what's old. Look at the next horizon of capability. Google has their Bard, but they have a whole platform they're building around AI. Really cool capability. They're one of hundreds of companies building applications or products or services. Keep an eye on what they're doing. Keep up with the news. It changes every day. I remember I got into software. I thought I could keep up. AI is like 4 times as fast. Just keeping up with ChatGPT is not the cool guy on the block anymore. Who's the next guy? So just keeping up with current events outside of just your studies is really helpful to see kind of what people are buying in commercial industries, usually an indicator of what DoD is going to do. If it's viable on that side, it's got dual use capability, it's probably coming over the DoD at some point.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I saw 3 other hands. So we're going to do rapid fire. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, and just have one person answer. So let's get the microphone over here, Melanie, real quick. Actually, this is being recorded. We can't hear you, sir, but this is being recorded.
So I'll be quick, okay? I came in 2009. It'll be 15 years in January. I'm crossing over to be a warrant officer, okay? So when I came in, the conversations being had. When I came in, it was like, hey, you had a lot of older NCOs, didn't want to adapt, didn't want to change, okay? Now, same conversations being had. AI, hey, I don't care. Like Dondre said, He said, hey, still dealing with the trust and with the kinetic, right? We use those words. They're still not going to want to adapt to something that's new. Okay, I'm still having these conversations. As I cross over to be that SME, how can I approach them with tact, obviously? How can I approach them to let them know that as we move on to this nuance of technology, in what way can they instill some type of trust with the way that we're going to cross over and change, but still obviously having to use that human intellect, that human instinct to be able to save lives and not have to use AI or depend on it heavily.
Okay, we're going to have one person answer it. We had a microphone on already, and then the other four of you can answer with the reception. Okay? Okay. And we have a question back here. Melanie, we're going to have another question there.
So really quick, I would say just like cybersecurity, or information assurance when I first started in that field. It was tough to get people on board, but I think it was just being shoved down their throats. They didn't know what part they played in it. You have to make them feel like they're a part of it. This is how you fit into it. If you don't, they have to be a part of the plan that makes the organization successful, leveraging AI, and show them how they fit into that. So I think that's the easiest way to get people. It's not going to happen overnight. So you got to talk to them, make them feel a little bit comfortable about them as they're executing, and they see it for themselves, and then they'll come around.
Okay, and we had a question here, but he heard reception, and he said, I'll just wait. I don't want to get in the way of the reception. But we have our third one right here.
Okay, I have a pointed question to you, DeAndre. Based on something you said at the beginning, you're either going to figure out, it's not going to replace you as long as you go with it. So there's a few technologies in the past that people have had to adapt with. Mobile phones come out, you're going to have to learn how to use smartphones. You're going to have to use computers. You're going to have to use things that will be massively adopted in society. AI is another one of them. But the big difference with AI, in my opinion, is you don't know how it's going to get used and, which segments of society are going to use it in different ways that people haven't even come up with yet. So when trying to prepare to make sure that you are less replaceable or going with it, is there... I don't know if I would say one size fits all, but best guesses you would take in how to prepare for that before we know exactly what tools and what industries are going to be required.
Hey, I got you. So traditionally, I'm a systems engineer. I hate cybersecurity people, and I hate software engineers, right? That's just the game, right? I try to implement things and build things, and they tell me no. And they go back and forth and back and forth and no. And that's kind of goes back to where the policy thing comes in of saying, hey, I need to build this, we need to deploy this, it's going to help these people downrange, and then we go to the cyber team and policy people, and they go, no, right? Or they go, maybe, change these things. I think traditionally, if you're an engineer, if you're like a Windows admin or a Linux admin, you need to really focus on understanding how code works, right? Understanding code bases, understanding what GitLab is, understanding DevSecOps, Grafana, Gripe, Claire, Fortify, like understanding how those processes work, and then playing around with those tools, right? That's going to be, even for me, right? I'm supposed to be running a business, hiring people, financial management, doing business development with my BD guy, and I want to play around with AI, right? Because I'm a nerd. That's what I want to do. And I think that a lot of people need to get on that spectrum of like, I could talk about AI, but I need to be able to actually implement it or do it as well. And you're totally right? It is ever changing, right? Just people, like the proposal game to respond to RFIs and RFPs has changed. It's drastically changed, right? Even I'm not going to take RFP questions and dump it right into ChatGPT. I may respond to the RFP question, how do you guys implement cybersecurity? We do it this way. That chat model already knows or should maybe know about some of the things we've done in the past performance, customers, all these things. So I made exit to say, make this sound better, right? Just that small thing has been a disruption, right? This is the disruptive panel to the industry, because now the government has to figure out, how am I supposed to take all of these responses and know if they're valid or not, right? And that's why, and that change has changed to the government going to orals, right? Cool, you can write the best response ever. Come here and show me, right on the board, right? Tell me how you're going to implement my network. Tell me how you're going to use AI in the cloud and work with ECMA in order to build our things, right? That is where everything is going. I think understanding how software works and how it can be created, it will definitely help you.
Okay, I'm going to ask you all for grace for 3 more minutes, because I know Tony on the end has been wanting to say something. Melanie pointed that out to me. And we're going to let our Marine have the last say here. So turn it over.
Well, to answer that, the kind of, I'll call it professional development questions, there are three real areas that you need to be proficient in to really develop a convincing AI solution. First, subject matter expertise. You need to know what you're talking about, whether that is taking care of horses or constructing networks. And AI has applicability in both. Second, computer engineering, and third, statistics and related fields. And really, you need to stay on top of developments in that. Open source is an amazing arena in that, and it's changing every day. There's some new thing that I learn about, I feel like, every other week with some awesome new capability that's just out there waiting to be used for you in a new application.
Thank you. Let's give this panel a round of applause. Wow.